This is Agelust, a podcast where we walk fearlessly into the uninhibited years, merging desire and wisdom, venturing into new paths without regret. I'm Jessica Podonsky, your host. I'm a board-certified family nurse practitioner and menopause provider, certified by the North American Menopause Society, or the Menopause Society. Besides sex, hormones, and mind expansion as medicine, I love a good story, and I hope to share a lot of them with you, and hear some from guests. A quick word of warning, I use office inappropriate language. The F-bomb will probably go off. Also, while I am a medical professional, nothing I say should be used as advice or prescription. I am not your medical professional. Talk to your healthcare team before making any changes. Now, on to the episode. When I think about Agelust, I think about pushing boundaries and rewriting the rule book of what it means to get older, what it means to have fearless desire, what it means to have endless possibilities together. Dr. Bianca Laureano is one of those expanders. She's an award-winning educator, curriculum writer, facilitator, and sexologist. She's the foundress of many groups, professional, collegial. Most recently, she is the editor and writer for the anthology of sexual professionals in North America. This anthology is called The People's Book of Human Sexuality, expanding the sexology archives. I was honored to be invited to write a chapter in this book. In this conversation, we talk about rest, we talk about professionalism, we talk about the sexual body. I hope you're as inspired by Bianca as I have been over the last decade plus. The whole idea of Agelust is that we have this opportunity as we move closer to even seeing the end. We know that we have a limited amount of time, right, as we get older. And how do we live fearlessly? How do we make mistakes and get out there and take risks without regret? And I am so excited to talk to you, Dr. Bianca Laureano, because you edited and wrote the People's Book of Human Sexuality, expanding the sexology archive. And in this book, let me find out her name. Who wrote the foreword?
Well, Ida Mandalay.
Ida wrote. I'm going to call her Ida like she's my friend. And do it. Dr. Laureano is an Afro-Latina sexologist, rabble-rousing educator, and a passionate human who brings a glowing fullness to every space that's blessed to have her. Yes, I have seen how she reaches out to people when they're struggling, how openly and vibrantly she discusses her wins as well as her challenges, how fearlessly she approaches uncomfortable things, and how tenderly she exists behind an exterior of exterior that some superficially reduce to fierce-haired, larger-than-life big personality. I have seen her grieve for her mother, grieve for our shared homelands, grieve for our communities in ways that are multifaceted, artistic, personal, narrative, and more. She goes on. And that is who you are to me. When I think of meeting you, what, 10 years ago? Was it 10 years?
Yeah. Oh,
Maybe
I think it's even more. More
yeah,
than yeah.
11 years? I don't even know. Years ago. I
Yeah.
think of that, and I think of your ability to have a skill that I think a lot of people don't really think about, and it's the ability to ask really excellent questions.
Mhm.
That is a very powerful skill.
Mhm.
You're all those things. You write curriculum, you edit people's work, you mentor, you educate, you create community, and you create safety.
Yeah. Thank you.
And that's
Thank you.
how I think of you. I wanted to talk to you because I think I've been working a lot with this transition called menopause. And I really do want to talk about the book, but I originally wanted to talk to you about, and I think you're going to have a better question and a better answer than I have, but there's this space as we get older that we hold for those who come after us. So we're carrying forward the legacy of our ancestors, right? And our family chosen, and also whatever, you get what I'm saying, right? And then we have to hold space for those young folks that come after us. And you and I have been blessed to live in a space where, in most cases, with hardship, but in most cases, if we needed to terminate pregnancy, we had that choice. And
Mhm.
now I have three young people in my life, and they have the choice as long as they stay here in New York,
Yeah.
but leave New York, they no longer have that choice. You run an education group. I'm going to stop talking in a second, right? But you run a program called the SAR. And what people probably don't know, it means sexual attitude reassessment.
Mhm.
And it's something that we have to do if we're going to work in this space of sexuality, education, counseling, all of that stuff. And you do an advanced one that is around abortion. So that's really where I wanted to start this conversation. And I want you to say anything you need to say about who you are. And then we
Yeah. Chit chat. Thanks, Jessica. Yeah, we met in New York City and we were at least 10 years younger, at least. And I think I was being trained at the time to become an abortion doula. So to literally go into the procedure room with people who are terminating their pregnancies, sit with them in the waiting room, sit with them in the recovery room and support them, help them with like pain management, communicate with their family members, answer their questions post the procedure. And so that's shifted a little bit in the work that I do today, where a lot more people are using medication abortion with pills as an option. So it's more text and phone based. But yes, I'm also an abortion doula and I claim sex educator. I claim a sexologist label as well, even though people feel all sorts of ways about the term sexologist, but it's another term, right? And I also think it's important to say that I'm child free by choice. And that's really important. I am the only reason I'm child free is because I had the choice to make to be child free. I had access to contraception. I had access to medical providers who maybe they weren't ideal in the moment, but none of them attempted to take the opportunity for me to build my family away. We see in other communities. So yeah, being in New York City, being on the East Coast, really did shape my understanding of reproductive justice, of access, of community care, which is literally why the book looks the way that it does because of all of the relationships that I have. I have a relationship with every writer in that book. And y'all said yes because it was me who was asking and because of our relationship. It wasn't because I gave you tons of money to write a chapter, right? I think people wanted that experience and they wanted the support of working with someone and writing because writing is just such a hard thing that we do. It's not something that we're really taught how to do in the way that I was encouraging us to do, which wasn't academic. It was just whatever we needed to say and share about our work. Um, and offering people an opportunity to get some one-on-one support with editing, show up to a group accountability writing session, and also just know that there are ways to craft something that don't always have to be so cold, so clinical, so linear all the time. And I think those are things that I like about myself as a
Yeah.
learner and as an educator. Yeah.
Yeah. The book that you created was this is that whole experience was this really powerful and beautiful experience for me, being one of the participants in the process. But I actually wanted to, I reread, like as of today, the book, notes and everything. So I definitely want to get into that. But before we do, I want to just ask you, because you said being, and I think it's a really important distinction when we think about body autonomy and we think about making that there are several people who choose to not have children, right?
Right.
Who are choose to live a child-free life. And bless your hearts, because I love a restaurant that does not allow children. Okay. Let me tell you something right now. All right. But I'm wondering, as you are getting older, I'm older than you, as we're getting older and you're still doing this work and it's so vital around abortion and I saw that you work with a physician assistant in this process and giving people the education, saying, I'm imagining this is what abortion is. This is what it is not. This is how we do this. But also, how do you feel age and being in this position of, first of all, some of the best doulas I know, because I used to be a birth doula, are the doulas that do not give birth.
Yeah.
Some of the best. Because if I give my birth story, if I tell you my birth story and you're trying to give birth and do your thing, you're going to start to think, oh, she didn't use medication. She did a home birth. She took pull, pull the baby right out of her own snatch. You know what I mean? I have to now do all these things. And that is not of service to anyone.
Mm.
So I think that work of being present and holding space for folks and being able to really hold space for them is so important. So one of the questions that I had was, how do you think those of us who are in this middle space can hold space? Or what does that mean? How do you think that, yeah, how do you think that we can hold space for younger people who are dealing with their fertility in a different way, in a different phase of life?
Yeah, it's definitely about intergenerational relationships and mentoring. And the person that I've partnered with to offer the abortion star is 70 plus years old. And she's been a physician's assistant. She had an illegal abortion before Roe v. Wade. She has provided people with abortion. She's performed them. This is just another example of what does an intergenerational relationship look like as we do this work. So we're like 30 years apart, right? In our relationship, but we became friends because we were trained as abortion doulas together. And she wanted to learn how to support people that were receiving the abortion when she wasn't the provider. And so we've stayed friends ever since 2009. And I think it is important to be able to learn from people who have lived during a period of time where there was no abortion care, or there was very limited, or it was criminalized, because I'm learning from her what it took, what the fear felt like, what the logistics were. And because I don't know that life. I know the life of people who maybe they're beyond like 12 weeks pregnant, so they have to go out of state. Like, I know that there's a resource, there's a way to plan to leave your home, be away for 2 to 3 days, fundraise for gas and food and hotel. And I get all of that, but there's a different level of fear, of shame, of revolutionary self determination when someone says, I'm going to leave my state that has banned abortion. I'm going to risk of being considered an abortion trafficker or violate the abortion travel ban in my state in order to access the care that I know I deserve and to be able to raise the family that I know I want for myself. And that's something that I know a little bit about, but I don't know entirely.
Yeah.
And I think there's a big gap sometimes between people in their 70s and people in their 20s. But what I've been able to do is learn from those people who are in that situation and be able to be a bridge for people, for younger people who maybe only want to talk via text or through TikToks or whatever it is, which is not something that like the 70 plus community is able to do. So I really see myself as like a middle person who can share. And also, you and I have been born into or birthed into this time where we we knew that like crime rates dropped, infanticide rates dropped because there was Roe v. Wade and because abortion was legalized. And now we're in a moment in time where we're considered like midlife, maybe, but we're not going to notice those crime rates increase. And we're going to recognize a shift of more petty theft, more quality of life crimes where people are going to be stealing formula or food or basic needs to feed their family. And then those individuals be criminalized and removed from their community, which then hurts the family that they were supporting. We're going to notice that cycle again and again. And that's not something that I think this country is ready for. And it's going to happen in the poorest states that already exist and have always hated abortion here. So it's learning from them and then being able to share and be like that middle person between those generations and also between those experiences. And it helps that like our beige don't age, right? Because we're able to communicate with them in a different way because they view us differently, right? We don't look like the Golden Girls that were on television who were great, but they were our age. And that is not who they're resonating or connecting with today.
Yeah.
Um, so yes, I see it as that middle person, literally what the word doula is meant to be, but also like a witness that people want, a companion in many ways. I take the work really seriously. And even as someone who's child free by choice, like I also have great relationships with children, great relationships with the people in my life who are birthing children, who have children. And I know that my responsibility is different than it is of a parent. But I think the trusted adult in young people's lives and children's lives, that individual or those individuals rarely ever get supported, elevated, acknowledged. And yet we're everywhere. And
So important. As a parent, and I don't mean to cut you off, but I just did. But as a parent, I consciously think about who are the adults who my children can go to when they cannot ask me whatever they need to ask, right?
Mhm.
Who are those? And you are so 100% correct. Your role is so fucking important. It is important as it is how society is shaped. You
Mhm.
know, it is how society is shaped.
Yeah.
The more that you have caring adults loving your children, the better off your children are.
Exactly. Exactly. And it opens me up to be able to show up in a way that I know some of my parenting friends can't for other children or even for their children sometimes, right? Like, I'm not someone who gets upset because a kiddo is not going to sleep. And that's not my life, right? So I can be that person that if I'm visiting friends, they're like, I'm going to yell at this kid if they don't get the fuck to sleep. I can be that person to be like, you know what? Just go get a glass of wine. I will sit in there with them because I don't care. I'm not upset. I'm not activated. I can be another witness, but also a bridge to those experiences. I just had a good friend who gave birth to their second kiddo. They're pretty isolated. They're super COVID conscious. And we were able to donate a good amount of money to their postpartum doula fund, which if we had children, we probably wouldn't even be able to do. Right. So that's another way of acknowledging that I'm able to save money differently. I'm able to make money differently. I'm available in different ways and accessible as well. I think that's so important. Like my friend called me up and they were like, oh my gosh, are you sure? This is the amount of money when it send us, it can clean our house twice over the next 6 months. And that makes me feel good because I can't be there for them. I can't hold this child when they need to like sleep on their own or get a break from body feeding. Like I can't be there in that way, but we can show up in
Yeah.
other ways. I think that's a really core part of interdependence and being together. Yeah.
I think interdependence is something that people just don't. I think also it just, when you are raised with a family structure, parent that comes from a culture where hyper independence above everything else is valued, in interdependence. You are 40 something years old like me. I'm way past that. So I learned it a couple years ago, learning about being interdependent, which actually you mention in your book. It is
Mhm.
mentioned in the book, right? In so many different spaces and places. So let's talk about it.
Yeah.
Um, so I love even the intro. I'm just going to go through. So this book is a textbook,
Yeah.
officially a textbook.
Mhm. Yeah.
And I'm going to encourage folks who are into learning about themselves, thinking about bodies different, thinking about work different, thinking about identity differently, that you get this very affordable talking textbook too, right? Because it's like in the 20s, right? Not
It's
no $150 textbook. So get the damn textbook.
right.
But one of the things that you start with, I love, was this concept. The first thing that I wrote here on page 20, right? You can see I like wish I would go
Yeah.
back to school, right? Can you tell? Can you tell?
Just
Like
a
I
smidgen.
just a little bit, right? You talk about this idea of bringing in, you open the book with transforming sex education curricula. And you talk about this idea of bringing what is professionalism, right? And bringing in the personal. And it really, like, in a kind of very mainstream workhorse capitalist structure, you think about never cry at work, don't get emotional, you leave everything outside,
Mhm.
don't bring in your personal business.
Right.
And it very much brought up that whole theory, and you probably can name the theorist better than me because I can't remember shit at all, but that concept of the personal as political,
Mhm.
right?
Mhm.
And that you say the ideas of professionalism are everywhere and they continue to dehumanize all of us.
Mhm. Yeah.
Those are the kind of gems that you get from this book, right? Because it is so true. So I love that you open that way. And how do you balance that? And what kind of risks do you think people take when they like put it all out there, or not all of it, but because you want to hold some things are just for you and for your people and
Mhm.
your circle. But
Yeah.
I don't know.
Yeah, it's interesting because I feel like there's parts to that to answer that question. The first part is like acknowledging how we were trained, and I'm including you in this because we were trained very similarly at the same time. Of not making it about you, that you're just there to offer the care, to offer the information. It's not about you. So you have to wear this uniform, or you can't show this part of your body, or you have to make sure that you follow the presentation outline or whatever it is, right? There's so many rules in order to do the work that we do. So that's one thing, right? And then as we do that work, and this is what you talk about in your chapter two, it's not as cut and dry as let me follow this outline, let me follow the protocol. That there's so much more about witnessing our clients, about showing up for them and being in the bodies that we're in, and demonstrating to them that we're here and intentionally present. And those are pieces that I think for many of us who are racialized as anything other than white, we experience that differently. And so do our clients and the people that we're supporting or mentoring or caring for. And what I learned was like the way that I was trained is not useful for the communities that I'm working with or the communities that I'm a part of. And so I had to do it the way that I was trained to do it to notice, oh, this isn't resonating with those individuals. And so there comes a point where I'm like, how do I do it differently? What does that mean for me to try something differently? And It was a lot of trial and error. It was a lot of failure because this is also happening at the time where the internet is developing, right? Like we're in that generation where we didn't have the internet the way that young people have it today. So we're also like learning new technology. We're trying to figure out how people are finding research, doing research, etc. So it took a lot of failure. And I think people don't ever want to talk about the failure part because we feel embarrassed or we feel like it shouldn't be something that we highlight in our work. But honestly, those are the moments where I learn more about how I can do things differently, or how I can do it better, or what needs to stay the same and what needs to evolve. And so having that opportunity to mess up and to fail and to learn how to intentionally apologize, to change my behavior was so essential to getting to the point where I'm at today, where I mentioned in the book, like, oh, I recognize that's a dehumanizing way to do the work. Oh, I recognize that was not allowing me to be my full self when I'm doing this work. And it doesn't mean that I have to share everything with someone, right? There's a different level of privacy that I think is part of your question. Like, how do we maintain the privacy while also connecting with people in a different way? Yeah, I think what's so important for us to notice is that when we build relationships with complete strangers who are often our clients or people that we're supporting, they resonate with us when we, one, acknowledge them, when we listen to what they're saying, when we listen with our whole bodies, not just with our ears, but also when we share a little bit more, right? For example, I will answer personal questions about my experiences and other people will not. And I'll do that also with young people. But I will also have boundaries, right? If a young person asks me, have you ever had sex? Instead of saying just yes or no, it depends, but I might say, thank you for that question. And just like I'm not comfortable talking to my parents about my sex life, I'm not comfortable talking to you about it. But I will answer specific questions that you might have about a sexual experience, like about pain or pleasure or discomfort or embarrassment. So, what do you really want to know about sex that I can help answer? So, that to me is a boundary. But then there's times where people are like, I'm thinking about getting an IUD. Does it really hurt? Should I do it? Maybe I should do this other method. And I will say, let me tell you why I chose a Paragard IUD. And let me tell you what my experience was like. And let me tell you how I've only had two because it is a 20-year long method, right? And let me tell you how it was different when I got the first insertion or the second, or when I got the one removed versus how I'm imagining removal today. I will definitely share those experiences in that context because people want to know. And they have a lot of questions. And rarely do doctors ever offer the fullness of what the experience could be like, right? Especially if you're at a teaching hospital. I got my IUD first at Harlem Hospital, and that's a teaching hospital. And so I knew that there was going to be pain. I knew that I should probably get this inserted when I'm menstruating so that my cervix is a little softer. It's easier to dilate and insert. But what I forgot was that if I'm going to a teaching hospital, they're going to have a resident who needs to learn how to insert this. And so it's going to mean that they're going to be dilating my cervix longer than if they weren't there. And that means more pain, more discomfort, right? And I have a really good way of coping with pain, but it's one of those things where when I share with people that they're like, oh, I could never. And I'm like, I get that, but I'm also invested in people practicing and learning. So I can take 2 more minutes of cramping pain, of having my cervix dilated, and I can tell you about it because I know that individual watching that means that they now know how to properly dilate a cervix and insert an IUD, which is super easy. So easy that I believe that when the medical industrial complex fall in this country, and I have access to a speculum dilator and an IUD, I can insert an IUD, right? And I feel the same way about abortion. Like one of my top questions to ask people when I date them is, what are you going to barter when capitalism falls? Because we're literally watching it fall. And it's a question to assess, are you paying attention? Have you thought about what you would do if we can't use paper money the way that we do today? But also, what skills do you have that you can share and that you know are valuable? And I always say I can perform abortions. I can teach people how to read. I can be a notary. I can be a scribe. And so I like to hear other people's responses to that question. But it's also because those types of reproductive health care, I want to say it's so easy to make people think that it is, but it really doesn't have this clinical, complicated component that many like anti-abortionists or anti-contraceptive narratives will have us believe that abortion was and is such a common experience, such a direct process that it doesn't require all these things that people think it does. It
Yeah.
really is a procedure that literally takes 7 minutes from beginning to end, and it is our medical industrial complex that has complicated that process and taken the 7-minute process and made it into 6 hours for one day. I think those are the pieces that are important for me to always come back to, and it's a practice of humanizing myself for myself, like rematriating back into my own body and mind that when I was trained, I was told to completely ignore. Right. And I'm sure it was the same thing with you when you're being trained to be a nurse. Ignore your pain. You have to stand for this law. It doesn't matter when your rounds are. Like, this is how you have to do it. Do it this multiple times. Like, it doesn't humanize you in the way that you need it to. And how revolutionary would it be if we begin to train nurses and physician assistant and other people to be thoughtful and mindful about what's happening in their bodies and in their minds to help them perform better. But it just hasn't happened yet. Um, but it's just so dehumanizing. And what would it look like to rehumanize ourselves for ourselves and also for our communities? And so that's really the question that I always am striving to think about answering for myself and my own longevity of doing this work, but also because I don't want to be like my parents who were so dehumanized that they could never really retire until they were super sick and were forced to, right? Like I don't want to live that kind of life. I want to live a life where I get to decide what I'm going to do, how I'm going to do it, who I want to work with. And that requires some dreaming and some failure and some shape shifting in many ways.
Yeah. I think that is so important, that concept of just finding grace, right? Recently I was getting ready to leave for the day and an incident happened in the exam room where I was taking care of a patient and like the words that are coming into my head are reminding me of my grandmother and saying like he could not hold his water.
Mm,
And so he couldn't. So
mm,
he ended up urinating, and I made certain choices to try and make him feel as little shame in the moment as possible. Anyway,
mm,
so the environmental services person that came at the end of the day or came in the middle to clean up, and I had done my best. And she started to say, "But why didn't you blah, 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 blah?" And I looked at her and I said, "I did the best I could at the time."
mhm,
And the thing is, she stopped fussing because that was the truth. But it was more important for me to say those words. And now those are coming out of my mouth a lot more because I truly did the best I could. Where
mhm,
before I would have really worried that I didn't do it right and I did this and I could have done it this way and not, and just, and part of having ADHD and there's a whole shame spiral that happens. It's like all these things happening and wanting to do such a good job, but just saying it out loud, saying I did the best I could at the time allowed us all to be human, right?
mhm.
The patient did their best. I did my best. And now I expect you to do your best. Not perfect, not
Right.
perfect. Just the best you can absolutely do at the
Yeah.
time. So it's really a beautiful concept. So you all need to get the book so you could just even get that line. All right.
Yeah.
About dehumanizing, right? Okay. I'm gonna keep going here.
Mhm,
I love that you talk about prep. I just want to say I talk about prep a lot in my job, my
mhm,
9 to 5, my paycheck job, which I love. We'll have to talk about that another time, what it means to be in these middle age to be, I'm 52, you're the age you are, and what we've seen when we were young and children and what it meant to be HIV positive and what it means today. It's just so amazing. Okay, but I'm going to get back to chapter 2. You have this conversation. We vision our dreams of safety into reality. And this is with Jadelyn St. Dre and
Delish.
Magenta Fire, which is like right there, Magenta Fire. I love that. And one of the thing that came up for me was concept of safety and rest and
Mhm.
pleasure, and how pleasure was in this conversation where one of them says pleasure can be, yes, this is it. Pleasure can be sitting by yourself on the bus. But I thought, yes, it can. Yes, it can. Yes, that is the pleasure. It's not about getting $100 massage and getting
Right.
a foot rub by whatever. Yeah, pleasure could be sitting down on the bus after you just got off work and nobody bothering you. That hit me so deeply. And when we
Mhm.
think about sex and sexuality and our bodies, because the mind and the body are on the same, take up the same space. They
Right.
are
Mhm.
connected in the spirit. Anyway,
Mhm. Yeah. I think, yeah, I think the nobody bothering you part is the piece for me that really, that is the safety piece where you know that nobody is going to mess with your safety. And so I'm 45 and I've never learned how to drive. And I know I'm going to figure it out, whatever. But I just lived in major cities. I don't feel like I need a license necessarily. But riding the bus was the way that I learned my new area. It was the way that I understood where the streets intersect. It was the way that I got to see and view landmarks. And so that I could figure out, oh, this is how I walk to that grocery store. Or, oh, look, here's another part over there that might have a bench or whatever. But being able to do that when people just leave you alone, like that is a level of safety that I think many femme people, especially femmes of color, don't always get the opportunity to experience because people are constantly bothering us, whether it be asking us a question, whether it be for information, or whether it be trying to like flirt with us or get our attention in some way. It's so exhausting to be around people that can bother you and that will disturb your peace. And so I think when Kalish and Jalen were talking in that way, that's one of the, I think, the roots of the safety component of how can we imagine what safety looks like for us when we know that even going outside may be a, a horrible event. Um, and so it's a risk. It takes courage to go outside, to leave our homes. And it's something that some of us don't have the ability or the privilege to be able to do. So yeah, so I really appreciated that.
yeah, I love that line. But as we talk, it also brings up when we think about aging, because a lot of times we talk about, when I think about this and I think about my mother, who obviously presents very differently than I do, right? Invisibility is a huge component of my understanding of who I am and moving through the world. And also how we become more invisible as we get older,
Hmm.
right? And it's interesting because I think about my mother's generation. So my mother's 83. She's very out about her age, which is a big deal for her because she's an actress. And so she really was not out about her age for a very long time. And now it's, I think folks look at, and you think about the co-facilitator for the summer, right? People aren't thinking these are the people who are like in the parks fucking in the 60s and tripping and doing all the shit. And now they've become invisible. And then when you are, in my mother's case, and what I talk about in my chapter is this, at one point, now she's an 83-year-old Black woman,
Hmm. Hmm.
and what kind of dismissal happens at that point. And for her, the pleasure is opposite. It's that I'll sit on the bus, and if you see who I am,
Mhm.
what a pleasure that is.
Mhm.
What
Yep.
a pleasure. Not in a creepy 83-year-old ladies kind of
Yeah.
situation, but,
Yeah,
uh,
and the "you see me" piece. Yeah, and I think that's the thing about age, like, getting older and having the gift of aging, it also comes with complexities of you become invisible.
yeah,
Like, people just don't even ask you if you need help, or, like, when you're at a store and you're like, "I need some can somebody help me? Where's the salesperson?"
yeah.
People just really ignore you as you age, and I think it's rooted in this idea, in this culture where we value use in a very narrow and particular way that is wild, and it's so deeply connected to ageism and, like, this youth supremacy that people have as, like, a value, and so, yes, but being seen, being acknowledged is also important, I think, for so many of us because 'cause we've been so erased. We've been ignored. We've been absorbed into, like, this blob of everybody else when really that's not no. I don't wanna be absorbed in that way.
Yeah. I think too that aging at a certain point, possibly because of the limitations, brings everyone to this level of in their body is unable to do what it used to do. And
Mhm.
it brings to mind like some of the work that you do around disability
Mhm.
and or different abilities, however, whatever feels most comfortable for folks in their own bodies. But it's just so I love that too. I have another note. I don't know what the hell I wrote here. System something. But I gotta tell you, the other thing that came up for me when I read this particular chapter was redefining the concept of healing.
Mhm. Mhm. Mhm.
And all of a sudden, I thought healing, and I'm going to do a whole like little mini episode on this. And who cares? People care, don't care. I don't give a fuck.
Mhm.
That's how I understand it. Healing to me is, I find the concept of healing and wellness to be very much in this particular image, particular body type, a particular look, a particular hair color, a particular skin color, a particular size. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
When in actuality, what this brought for me, like came into my head, is that healing is more like weaving a
Mhm.
tapestry.
Mhm.
You can have a piece of cloth. Now, my oldest kid, like that's her thing is textiles, right? And she loves knit, and that's her. She's in school for it. And so I'm learning so much about weft, and I don't even know what she's talking about half the time. But you pull a thread and you can take it apart, which is what you've done here with this book, right? You can
Mhm.
take that. So what you thought was this cloth, that was this one piece, and you pulled it and it's apart, but you can take the tools and weave it into something even more magnificent.
Mhm.
That
Mhm.
is healing,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
That becomes this other, I don't know.
Yeah.
That's what came up for me.
Absolutely, and it looks so many different ways for so many different people.
Yeah.
One of my, like, big I don't know, the thing that, like, burns my biscuits is when
Yeah.
everybody wants to tell you what healing looks like, what
Yeah.
healing feels like, how it's supposed to smell and taste or whatever, and so that's your experience, that is not anybody else's. It's so nonlinear. Healing could be so chaotic. It can also be very lonely. It can also be it could be so many things, and none of them are wrong necessarily for anyone, but it's hard, right? When we are telling people this is what you need and you need to do it in this way for it to be considered valid or
Yeah.
useful or real or true or whatever
Yeah.
other essentialist language people want to use. And it excludes a lot of people. I think it also doesn't acknowledge what do we do with the people who can't find the healing that they need and deserve and want? Are we just going to leave them behind? Like, or are we going to create an environment where they can find what they need? I think that is the creativity that is required when we think about healing, when we think about building, creating something. And that's really what guided this book, where it's I talk about this book and say it's a textbook for the future. Is are people gonna acknowledge it in 2023 when it was published as that? Sure, there's gonna be people who get it. But honestly, this book is probably gonna blow up in 5 years. it's going to become essential text in 5 years because we're so far ahead of what is currently happening around people educating or learning or whatever, building their consciousness. All of us in that book were just so far beyond where other people are at because they have forced to be isolated. They have only learned from white people. They do not ask questions.
Yeah.
They really have yet to tap out of the capitalist bullshit structure. And those of us in that book, a lot of us are abolitionists, but we don't say it. You can tell in reading the book. And it's not to say that we want to destroy all the systems. We want to destroy the things that do not service us. And it takes creativity to think about that and to create it. It's the same thing. I tell people this all the time. I teach an intersectionality class because people love to misuse Black feminist gifts all the time, like intersectionality. I tell people, I'm like, if you think you're doing it right because you're using an intersectional framework, you're already doing it wrong because intersectionality, one, it doesn't work in every situation. It's not going to work outside the US all the time. And if you're not clear about when intersectionality doesn't work or what can compromise it or how to actually implement it because you haven't done the work, then it's not going to work. But also, people assume that, oh, I'll get the answer to the issue when I use an intersectional analysis. And the reality is, no, you're not. You're not going to get the answer. You're going to get the reason why oppression is happening, or you're going to get the areas where power is being misused. You're not going to get the answer. We are required to be creative and come up with the answer or the solutions to the phenomena or the issues when we're using an intersectional analysis, right? And I think that's the part that people always forget. And that's such an essential component of all of our liberatory frameworks, all of the ways that our ancestors, the people that came before us, who were leading these other liberatory movements, they valued art and creativity in a way that it's not being nurtured in the same context today. And I think that that's important to acknowledge and also to understand that creativity doesn't just look like painting a picture. Creativity also looks like your imagination. It also looks like creating new words. It looks so many different ways. I think that's a component that in our professions, people don't always welcome or embrace the creativity that's possible.
Yeah. It's I had a teacher years ago, Kurt Lampkin, who talked about creating society. And you were talking about earlier, what will you bring when there's no capitalism? What will you bring? And you cannot have, this was a live poetry class. And you cannot have society without storytellers and poets. You cannot have civilization without that. It is essential. And the concept of words. And even with my own kid, like I notice my youngest, I recently caught myself because she said something like she might have used axe or something like that. And I went to go correct her. And I said, I'm not doing that. I'm not doing it. I'm not doing it.
Yeah.
This is where she is. This is where I live. This is what is happening. Period. Period. That's it. What is the point? She can have some other person correct her, and I'm going to let her just communicate to me as she needs to communicate.
Right. Exactly. Yeah. She's going to get corrected everywhere else.
Exactly.
She needs to get corrected in her own home, which is supposed to be like her landing spot. You're supposed to be the person she can go to and feel comfortable with. But if she's constantly being critiqued, that's not going to nurture that environment.
No, it's going to stifle and it's going to stop her from expressing herself. And the flow is stopped at that moment because I'm like talking about how you fucking say axe or act. And like you said it, I blew her flow right there. I blew it. I killed it. I killed it.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right? Okay. Buying people every day. Let me tell you, I ask a question. In the last 2 months, have you had exchange of sex for money, food, safety, or shelter? It's a question I ask time and time again, but 20 times a day. And every time I'm giggling in my head because I think, Who fucking hasn't?
Right.
Fucking hasn't had exchange of sex for food, shelter, money, or safety? We may pretend that we haven't,
Yeah.
but I'm telling you right now, at 52 years old, I sure as Skippy have.
Yeah. Absolutely. And probably will again in the future. That's the thing. Like, and that's what Christina's whole chapter is about there too, about how sex work is not this horrible, bad thing.
Oh,
It's happening for her, at least from her perspective, but also that she notices the exploitation that capitalism requires of her. She's currently a licensed clinical social worker, just recently became a parent. And so she's noticing these shifts and changes, but she knew that far beyond. And she's like, it's different when I get to be exploited on my own terms
you.
and only to do it for 5 hours twice a week
Yeah.
versus a 40-hour work week where I'm being exploited. I think that's the labor issue that people don't want to acknowledge.
Or in relationship to keep the peace.
Yes,
How many
exactly.
times we hear that, right? And I just wanted it done. I just wanted it over and a da 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 or whatever. And I just wanted us to get along or whatever that was, right?
Yeah.
It's really, I just thought like the whole time and every time I ask that question, I think, I know what I'm trying to find out. Are they in risk? Is there trafficking? How can I support? And I say that very clearly to the patients. I say, I ask these questions to figure out how we can partner together and I can find you support should you need it or want it, period. But in my mind, I think, damn, who doesn't? Who doesn't?
Like, identify those individuals. Yeah,
Yeah, who hasn't? You're just straight up lying to yourself. Um,
exactly.
Chapter 4, I'm going through chapter by chapter. I'm telling you,
Okay.
I recall, I remember seeing him speak. I don't know Francisco Ramirez personally,
Yeah.
but I saw him speak. It might have been either at AltCon or maybe it was at ASEC. I don't remember what it was,
Mhm.
but he changed my life. So you could tell him that
Okay.
because he talked about, I think he was doing that sex therapy for free. I'm sorry. I apologize that I don't remember exactly what he, and it's
Yeah.
here. It's
No,
here.
that's funny. Yeah.
And then he ended up working for the UN.
Mhm.
And they were like, now you got to get your master's. And I thought, hot damn,
Yeah.
I think it happened. This is it. This is it.
Yeah.
And he was one of those people that like seeing is to believe. It's one of those people who like told me, and he doesn't know he told me that, but you could tell him or he can listen. He told me, you can do this.
Yeah.
You can make this happen. So that's what all I have to say about that. And you could share that with him.
Yeah. That's nice.
Let's see. I'm going to move on to chapter 5, solidarity as liberation. I like that too. I like this whole just anyway, and we're going to keep going because otherwise we'll be going. Then there's a chapter 6 that is just really fabulous, if I got to say. That'd be my chapter. I actually didn't read it. I have not read it.
Yeah. One of the things that other people have shared who have written chapters are like, I read it over and I'm surprised that I wrote that. I feel like I've evolved. How could I have published that or put that down on paper? Was I wrong? Like, people are having some concerns about what happens now. And I'm like, we wrote this during a pandemic, during a crisis when it was chaotic and we didn't know what was happening. And also, we get to have an archive of how we've evolved. It's important to be able to say, this is where I was at in 2021. And maybe I'm not in the exact same place in 2023 or as we enter into 2024, but that's who I was then. And this is part of the healing process too, is like reflecting the self-awareness and giving ourselves and showing ourselves some grace. Like, that's where we were. It was a heightened period of time. And then there's other people who are like, I love it. It was great. I know what I wrote and I stand behind it 100% still. So people are having different reactions to reading their chapters 2 years later, 3 years later that are different and that shift. And change. And as an editor, like I definitely show up for them as they work through those feelings. And it's real. I don't want to say it's not, but that's why there's two introductions, right? I have an introduction for 2022 or 2023, and then I have one from 2020, right? Because so much had changed and shifted, but not really. The goal of the text stayed the same nonetheless. We're literally building the archive that we want other people after us to find and to witness and to notice. And we're filling in a lot of gaps that still remain in these fields. So I'm proud of us.
I had an NP coworker read the chapter and she didn't know that I wrote it.
Oh, really? Wow.
And she was like, that was really great. She's that was so good. Da, 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 da. And she came back and I was like, wrote it. She's stop it. You
Yeah.
did not. And I was like, yeah, I wrote that. That's me. So I wanted somebody to read it, but I don't want to take up too much of your time. I want to just point out a couple more things. It was just so good. This book is so good. And if you go all the way to the oral narratives,
Mhm.
the conversation that you have, again, I'm going to end with Safia.
Okay.
Safia, am I saying her name?
Saifa. Saifa.
Wait, say it again.
Saifa?
Saifa. Okay, Saifa. I apologize. I apologize if I set up, and now I'm doing it right. I just read, it was just so good. I want to end with that, but I want to also just tell you that writing this piece with you, I think you're the first person ever going back to this concept of grace and pleasure and safety. You're the first person when you were doing Black Sweat,
Mhm.
you were like, take what you need, take the time you need
Mhm.
to just take that time. And it might have also been like before when I showed up at IPC or whatever, IPA, whatever that thing is called, right? ICP, whatever that is called. But to say, take the time you need, take care of yourself through this work,
Mhm.
that speaks to that whole concept of humanizing
Mhm.
and professionalism. Being professional, but being a human being engaged in professional discourse
Mhm.
or discourse of a vocation. I don't fucking know what I'm saying, but you get what I'm saying.
Yeah. Yeah.
And it meant so much to me and it made me feel so safe because I'd had so many teachers and mentors who were like, no, we demand this and you can do better. And
Mhm.
that when I was doing my work for you and writing this piece for you, I cried
Mhm.
a lot of tears shed. It was hard work and it was vulnerable work.
Yeah.
And just offered, you just doulaed me and I'm sure all of the writers through it. You did just a gorgeous job that people really should want to aspire to,
Mhm.
honestly.
Thank you. Yeah, there's one Sarah who writes about abortion in the book.
Yeah. Yeah.
She's a PhD. She talks about talking to your kiddo about abortion when they
Yeah.
see anti-abortion protesters in Brooklyn. And she tells me similar things. She's like, I get asked to write articles all the time. She's like, but I can only write an article with you. Like we've published in another academic journal. And I can't do it with anybody else. Nobody else is going to support me or give me the time and space that I need or nudge me the way that you're going to do. And that's what I need to actually do the work. And so she's, I can't do it alone. And I think that I think is really important because we're in a society that says we have to do the work on our own. We have to take pride in being independent. And for me, I'm like, yeah, that was a narrative that we were told in our 20s and into our 30s. But now we're realizing, no, we can't do it alone. We need each other.
Yeah.
We need to go through the hard parts. And Sarah always makes me laugh because we've written lesson plans together, an academic article, this chapter together. And there's times where I tell people just write in the voice that you have. And Sarah's one of those people that was so critical. And part of my editing supporting her has been things like she'll say, for example, in a lesson plan we did a while ago, she had some example about maybe you don't like your body hair and you think to yourself, and this is, I'm just making this up, but listen
Yeah, yeah,
closely.
yeah, yeah.
You're so hairy like a gorilla. And I was like, damn, sir. That's my note to her was like, you don't have to be that harsh. Maybe it can be something different. Like, oh, I don't like the way that that my leg hair feels when the wind blows and I'm on the beach. I need to shave. Like, it can be a little bit more caring and supportive. But that's just a really great example of what an editor offers. It's not about changing the intention, but it is about helping people understand, like, you don't need to reveal that you talk to yourself in this way. But
Yeah.
as you maintain that privacy, I mean, you know, I just told the story, but that's for us to know and for me to help you reimagine what else you could do. And so she rewrote, you know, that line about whatever. And we just laugh about it even to this day. And she's like, Bianca, that's the kind of editing support that I need. Because other people would just let that pass by without recognizing the racialization components,
Yeah.
without recognizing the dehumanizing components, because she's a Black woman, right? So all of that are really, that to me is part of what I think editing requires. And it's a form of love, to be quite honest.
Yeah.
It was such a privilege and an honor and a joy to love up on y'all over those 3 years.
Yeah, it was really amazing. I want to end with such a powerful piece, this conversation where Saifa talks about your amazing questioning. And it's those questions that help us to be our best selves.
Mhm.
I think that happens in education, in your
Mhm.
curriculum. I think it happens in your editing. And the last thing that I wrote reading this whole piece, and I'm actually gonna have my kid read chapter 13, the face model, but Bina
Mhm.
says another aspect of erotic marginalization, one even more understudied than the first two, involves experiences of pleasure. So we end with pleasure.
Mhm.
And I wrote the note, erotic marginalization is the thief of joy.
Mhm. Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
It's- I don't know. I know personally you've brought so much joy to my life. And I know that you've brought joy to like so many people's lives. I want to ask you, what is your big imagining for as we move into 2024?
So thank you. And I think I would love to have this be like a volume, like this being the first volume. And maybe like in 3 years, I pull together other writers, maybe bring back some of the others and write something, an update, or maybe something completely different. Because there are a lot of voices that aren't included in the book. Let's be honest. Like, you can't include every single person. But if it becomes a volume and there's actually like a conjuring, so it's literally in the index, like conjuring. There's moments where I'm like, conjure with us that this can be a volume, that we can do like the second edition and it be a more expansive archive where maybe some of the original uh, writers come back and then we welcome in new ones. That's what I imagine. That's still the intention. I remember sharing that with the editor when they asked me, what book would you want to write? And I was like, it's a series, it's a book series. And that's what I still think that's possible. Have they asked me about it? No. But that's what I mean when I say this is a book, a textbook of the future.
Yeah.
People still want the standard textbook of, oh, here's going to be the pop up that says, here's how to work with the Mexican people.
Yeah.
Here's how to work with the poor people. And it's like, that's not useful anymore. We don't need those pop ups. We don't need a graph. We don't need whatever else. And I think that's what makes this book different is that it communicates what needs to be communicated in a variety of voices and it can resonate with a group of people who are like, I'm never going to be able to go to college, but I can get this book at my library and I
Mhm.
can learn how I can talk about sex with my community members who also haven't or won't go to college. And that I think is really important to me because there's a huge group of people that we miss out on connecting with who are also sex professionals who have not gone to college or have not gotten like quote unquote standard training. So I really wanted this to be something that public libraries can also offer to our communities who are doing informal, non-formal types of education and support, and encouraging people to use their public library card. You don't have one, get one, because we need those spaces for sure.
I'm a massive fan of your work and everything that you do. And I hope to give you a big hug. Last thing that I want to, and I think you could probably come up with a better question than this, but when you hear this podcast is called Agelust, and what does that conjure for you?
That lusting after things stays with us no matter what our age is, that it's not something that's so foreign, that it's a really common experience. And even if we come to it later in life, or if we forgot about it earlier and then lost it along the way, we can always come back to it. So those are the things that, yeah, that show up for me when I think about the work that you do too. Yeah.
Thank you. All right. This is great. Thank you, Bianca. I'm going to end tell everyone how to find you.
Oh, so I'm super accessible. If you type my name to the internet, you'll find me online. So my first and last name.com is my website. I also teach classes at antiuppd.com, which are where you can find like the SARS and other classes that I offer. And then on Instagram, it's a really long name, but it's Lati Negra Sexologist. And if you're following Agelust, you can find me by looking at their followers because we follow each other. So yeah, I'm super accessible on purpose. And I like to tell people that. So yeah, reach out.
Thanks again for listening. If you want to work with Bianca or see what she's doing, bring her curriculum into your environment, your office, your school, your group, you can find her in a few different ways. They'll all be listed in the description. Antiuppd.com is one. That's ANTEUPPD.com. That's where she's got her certification, her classes, her curriculum. You can also find her on Bianca Laureano, as well as latinosexuality.com. I'm also going to put a link to the anthology, The People's Book of Human Sexuality, Expanding the Sexology Archives. Yes, we talk about it as if it's a textbook, and it is a textbook, but it's very accessible textbook. So if you've got any interest in reading about sex, sexuality, gender, nursing, that's my chapter. Check out the book. You can always find me on the gram at agelust.co. You can shoot me an email as well at hello@agelust.co. Until next time. All right, Agelusters, listen up. If you're into what we're creating, cut the crap and hit the like button. Share the damn thing and leave a review that's so good it makes us all blush. And that's not easy. To those of you who left those 5-star reviews, I can't thank you enough. It keeps my Agelust flame burning. If you've got something on your mind, spill it. We're all about diving into the good stuff because this journey is as much yours as it is mine. Agelust is a ride you didn't know you needed. So buckle up. There's more coming.